in a timely way. If they are able to do that, we won't have inflation problems down the road, but if they don't do that, then we will.
And I want to get your outlook on the jobs situation in the country. Obviously, we had a disappointment. That was no surprise. But for this segment of the economy, how's it looking? The rate of job losses seems to have decreased.
It's a little early to say that. We're still in the midst of the very sharp declines. This is really as sharp as we've seen in this downturn. This should be a very gradual improvement as we look ahead, if we do get the GDP numbers going in the right direction.
Hey, Dean Mackey, thanks so much for joining us. Dean coming to us from Barclays Capital. Now, a new twist in the case of alleged Ponzi schemer Bernard Madoff. He could be moving towards a plea deal. We'll take a look at some of the legal aspects coming into play when we come back. Stay with us here on Bloomberg Television.
This week on Venture, Liz Lang on how her chic maternity wear made her a household name.
So it was like this aha moment of pregnancy clothing needs to look like real fashion. And they all said, oh, maternity's a terrible business, don't even think about it.
Watch Venture, the world of small business and big ideas, Fridays at 8 p.m. and Saturdays at 8:30 a.m., only on Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Venture is brought to you by Chase. Protection matters. Chase what matters.
Your Chase card has a unique built-in fraud monitoring system. So online or off, you're protected. Protection matters. Chase what matters.
50 years of dedication. 50 years of teamwork. 50 years of dependability. American Century Investments. Focused on performance.
Worst case scenario, your clever ways to cut costs are considerably curtailing productivity.
Who's got change?
Best case solution, cut cable and get Verizon high-speed internet plus phone for business.
You'll upgrade your performance and lower your costs. Call 1-888-691-1161 and get Verizon high-speed internet plus phone for your small business for as low as $59.99 a month for 12 months. Plus get over $200 in rebates and the reliability of the Verizon network. Call 1-888-691-1161 and for our lowest price ever, as low as $59.99 a month, you'll get a dedicated broadband line so you won't be slowed down when your neighbors are online. 24/7 tech support and unlimited calling. Plus over $200 in online rebates.
With a connection you can count on, your company can create considerable coin.
Verizon high-speed internet plus phone for business. One of the many tools in the Verizon Small Business Toolbox.
Well, Bernie Madoff may be nearing a guilty plea following remarks from his lawyer that they are waiving an indictment.
David Schoen, partner at Schulman, Rogers, Gandel, Porty, and Ecker, joins us now from Washington, D.C. He heads his firm's white-collar criminal defense practice and is considered one of the top criminal defense lawyers in the country. Among his past clients, members of the Bonanno family. Let me ask first, a famous name there, but probably nothing will ever become more famous than Bernie Madoff here as far as white-collar crime. This, I'm assuming, the biggest case you've ever worked on, the biggest case probably in existence as far as white-collar crime.
In terms of numbers, there's simply no question. Whether the numbers are at 20 million or the original estimate of 50 million, everything else pales. I mean, the Stanford case now looks like it may be coming close, but you're right. In terms of numbers, this is it.
All right, so the news today is waiving an indictment. Explain what this means. Does it move closer to a possible guilty plea?
Right. In basic terms, every citizen has the right under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution to be indicted, meaning to have the prosecutors present a case to a group of citizens who then determine whether charges should be drawn up in the case. In this case, he's going to proceed by information. He's waived his constitutional right to an indictment, and information is just a charging document that the prosecutor draws up. But its ramifications here are interesting. I mean, it clearly indicates what everyone has suspected and perhaps known all along, that he's been cooperating with the authorities. Of course, his original statements gave him virtually no other choice. And this will be a document that's negotiated between the parties, and there'll be a number of deal points which I could suggest to you.
Well, why don't you go ahead and suggest them to us? What do you expect?
Well, in this case, I mean, you have to think about what is it that Madoff's lawyers could be looking for him, because the press on this has been so horrible, the outrage is so great because of these numbers. What can he hope to salvage? Well, we've already seen in this related civil proceeding his lawyers claiming that a great deal of assets, $45 million in one case, $17 million in another, are exclusively his wife's, ownership of a home, exclusively his wife's. Clearly, part of his deal, one would think, would be to preserve assets of other family members so that get the government to agree not to go after those. That's one thing. And then, of course, to try to minimize his prison time. But, when you're talking about numbers anywhere approaching this, the sentencing guidelines would put him well into life. But then there's charge negotiation. What will the charge be in the information?
And of course, a lot of people don't realize that the amount of money, $50 billion here, does push the sentencing higher, right? I mean, if it were only $1 million fraud, it's different than a $1 billion fraud.
Well, that's 100% right, and it's a very important point. I mean, you've far surpassed the threshold for life imprisonment if he's charged with securities fraud. There'll be multiple counts if there were an indictment returned. Securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, all sorts of charges that would put him a long time ago well into life in the guidelines. The guidelines, of course, were graduated scale, and it's a function in these kinds of cases on the dollar amount loss figure involved.
And talk about the implications or possible implications of the lawyer Ira Sorkin, whose parents apparently invested with Madoff.
Right. Again, it's a very interesting point in this case. There clearly is the potential for a conflict there. The judge is going to have to conduct what in New York is called a cursio hearing. He's going to have to bring in independent counsel to advise Madoff, and the government will insist on this. And the simple reason is, if down the road, for example, this is how it could play out, Mr. Madoff changed his mind and decided he made a mistake in pleading guilty, he could allege that his lawyer had a conflict of interest because, as an investor or the son of an investor, it was in his lawyer's interest to have him plead guilty to aid in a faster recovery, an easier case in the civil cases. I have to point out, of course, Ira Sorkin is a very well-regarded lawyer, and this is a waivable kind of conflict. So the judge will conduct that hearing. If Mr. Madoff is satisfied with going forward with Mr. Sorkin, then he will.
All right, David Schoen, thank you so much for joining us. David, their partner at Schulman, Rogers, Gandel, Porty, and Ecker.
And we have breaking news we want to tell you about. President Obama has said, or he is rather said, to be ready to lift federal stem cell funding, the ban on the stem cell funding. Obama is set to sign that order at the White House on March 9th. That's according to officials. Now, a lot of companies will be affected by this. Jaron comes to mind. Also, lawmakers in the lead on this include Senators Harkin, Orrin Hatch, Specter, Feinstein, Barbara Feinstein, Dianne Feinstein, of California. Barbara Boxer's the other senator from California, plus Representative Mike Castle and DeGette. All right. You can read much more about Bernie Madoff and all of today's stories on Bloomberg.com. More in a moment.
If you're an investor now more than ever, you need to listen to this. Market direction is the single most important thing you need to know to make money in any market. VectorVest identified a confirmed